Imagine standing at the bottom of the world. The wind hits you at over 100 miles per hour. The temperature drops to levels that freeze exposed skin in minutes. There is no enemy in front of you, no battlefield, no orders to advance. And yet, in 1946, the United States Navy sent nearly 4,700 soldiers, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft to this frozen wasteland. The largest military expedition Antarctica had ever seen. No war had been declared, no invasion was planned. Officially, it was called a training mission. But what lay beneath that ice, and what the world's most powerful nations feared losing control of, would shape the fate of an entire continent for generations to come. To understand why thousands of military personnel descended on the most inhospitable place on Earth, we need to go back further, back to a century of competing flags planted in the ice. Antarctica had been drawing nations southward since the early 1800s. British, Norwegian, Chilean, Argentine, and American explorers had all made claims, some overlapping, some bitterly contested. But Antarctica wasn't just romantic territory for bold explorers. By the mid-20th century, scientists and military strategists were beginning to suspect something extraordinary. That beneath the ice sheets covering this continent, a landmass larger than Europe, lay one of the most mineral-rich environments on the planet. Coal seams had already been discovered in the Transantarctic Mountains. Geological surveys hinted at iron ore, copper, and chromium deposits. And most critically, as the Cold War began to take shape, petroleum geologists speculated about offshore oil reserves that could rival those of the Middle East. The ice was hiding a treasure chest, and every major power on Earth knew it. This is where Operation Highjump enters the story. In August 1946, U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, already a legendary figure from two previous Antarctic expeditions, was placed in command of the largest single Antarctic operation in history. Task Force 68, as it was officially designated, included an aircraft carrier, a submarine, destroyers, supply ships, icebreakers, and enough men to staff a small city. The official stated purpose was straightforward: to consolidate and extend U.S. sovereignty claims in Antarctica, to train personnel and test equipment in polar conditions, and to conduct aerial photographic surveys of the continent. What made this moment remarkable was its sheer scale. Nothing like it had ever been sent south before, or since, on such a unilateral basis. If you're finding this story compelling, hit subscribe. There's a lot more forgotten history where this came from. But here's what many people at the time didn't fully appreciate. The United States wasn't the only nation watching Antarctica with strategic eyes. The Soviet Union, Britain, Argentina, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, France, and Norway all had overlapping or competing interests in Antarctic territory. Some of these claims dated back decades. Argentina and Chile, in particular, held passionate convictions about Antarctic sovereignty. Convictions that put them in direct tension, not only with each other, but with Britain, whose own claim overlapped theirs in the Antarctic Peninsula region. The post-World War II world was reorganizing itself rapidly. Old colonial empires were fracturing. New superpowers were consolidating influence wherever they could. Antarctica, with its untouched resources and its strategic position at the bottom of the globe, was beginning to look less like a frozen wilderness and more like an unclaimed prize. Operation Highjump photographed approximately 60% of the Antarctic coastline. It produced aerial maps of a continent that had previously been only partially charted. But it also sent a clear geopolitical signal. The United States was serious about Antarctica, and that signal was heard in Moscow, London, Buenos Aires, and beyond. What happened next would take more than a decade to fully resolve, and it would not be resolved by military force. Through the early 1950s, Antarctic territorial tensions quietly simmered. Argentina and Britain came dangerously close to open confrontation on more than one occasion. Several nations maintained year-round scientific bases, partly as expressions of sovereign presence. The continent was becoming, in the language of diplomats, a problem. Then came something unexpected. Science offered a way out. The International Geophysical Year of 1957 to 1958 was one of the most ambitious collaborative scientific efforts in human history. 67 nations agreed to conduct coordinated research across the globe, including in Antarctica. For 18 months, scientists from the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, Argentina, Australia, and 7 other nations worked side by side on the ice, sharing data, sharing bases, and discovering something perhaps more powerful than any mineral deposit: the value of scientific cooperation. The goodwill generated during that period was genuine, and politically, it created an opening that sharp minds in Washington, Moscow, and elsewhere recognized immediately. Like the video if this surprises you, because what came next is one of the most quietly remarkable diplomatic achievements of the 20th century. On December 1st, 1959, 12 nations, including the United States and Soviet Union, 2 nations locked in one of the tensest geopolitical rivalries in history, signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington, D.C. The treaty was radical in its ambitions. It declared Antarctica a continent dedicated to peace and science. It suspended all territorial claims without extinguishing them, a careful legal balancing act that allowed nations to preserve their positions without triggering conflict. It prohibited military activities, nuclear testing, and nuclear waste disposal on the continent, and it mandated the free exchange of scientific findings. But there was a gap, a significant one. The treaty said nothing about mining. This omission was not accidental. In 1959, the technology to extract resources from beneath Antarctic ice didn't really exist. The question of mineral exploitation was theoretical, so the negotiators left it for another day. That day arrived with uncomfortable urgency in the 1970s and 1980s, as global energy crises focused new attention on untapped resource reserves, and as Antarctic geological surveys grew more specific about what lay beneath the ice. The treaty nations began negotiating what became known as the Convention on the Regulation of Antarctic Mineral Resource Activities, or CRAMRA, a framework that would have permitted tightly regulated mining under international oversight. After 6 years of negotiation, CRAMRA was finalized in 1988, and then, almost immediately, it collapsed. France and Australia refused to ratify it. Environmental groups had mounted a powerful global campaign, arguing that no regulatory framework could adequately protect a continent as fragile and scientifically irreplaceable as Antarctica. Public opinion shifted, and the political will to push mining forward simply evaporated. What emerged instead was the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, the Madrid Protocol, signed in 1991. It designated Antarctica a natural reserve devoted to peace and science, and it imposed a comprehensive prohibition on all mineral resource activities. Mining was banned for a minimum of 50 years, with any future review requiring unanimous consent from all treaty parties. Comment below. Do you think the mining ban will hold when that review period comes? So why did 4,700 soldiers go to Antarctica? Because in 1946, the world was reorganizing its power structures. Territorial ambitions were running hot, and the frozen continent at the bottom of the Earth looked like it might become the next arena of great power competition. The military expedition was, in the most direct sense, a show of force and a statement of intent. And why did mining eventually become illegal? Because over the following 4 decades, something rare happened in international relations. Competing nations chose, step by step, negotiation by negotiation, to pull back from the edge. Scientists replaced soldiers, treaties replaced territorial disputes, and a global environmental movement gave ordinary people a voice in deciding the fate of a place most would never see. Antarctica today remains the only continent on Earth with no permanent human residence, no sovereign government, and no active resource extraction. It is governed by international cooperation in a way that no other piece of the planet is. That isn't inevitable. It wasn't always likely. It was chosen, imperfectly, politically, and against tremendous competing pressures, but chosen nonetheless. The soldiers who stood at the edge of that frozen world in 1946 could not have imagined it. An entire continent protected, not because it had no value, but because the world eventually decided its value lay in something other than what could be dug out of the ground. Perhaps that is the most remarkable thing Antarctica has ever produced. Not oil, not ore, not territorial victory, but the strange, fragile, still unfinished idea that some places on Earth are worth more when left alone.